Julie works harder on January 6th and all of these political prosecutions than anybody else I've ever seen in the media. And if you aren't following Julie, you need to be following her because she gets the actual court documents up faster than anybody I've seen. She works more hours than anybody I have seen. And we bring her in now. I believe she's in Chicago. But, Julie, how many hours a week do you think you have been working on these Jan 6 cases? And I'm just curious on this because I do think it's important. How many other people in media are even doing this? In other words, if you weren't working on this, how much of what gets out that you put into the media ecosystem do you think would even get a bit of attention? Just to kind of start big picture here with you.
Wow, what a question. And thank you for that. I don't know. I can't even calculate. Does this include like the 3 hours a night I'm laying there awake trying to figure out like what's going on, what to work on next?
No, I mean, you are incredible on this, and I think it should because, I mean, you've got to be doing 70, 80-hour weeks minimum, and you've done it now for years on this. And I don't know if anybody else has ever complimented you on just the sheer amount of energy and effort and commitment it takes to cover this. But I want to make sure we do it. I know we've had you on the show quite a bit over the past couple of years, but I think that's a testament to your endurance and how much you are committed to doing the work here, which almost no one else is.
Well, that's very kind. Thank you for noting that. I do. I mean, I guess I know that it's work. But I consider it sort of like more of a personal mission than even a professional one. When I go to D.C. last week and I see these defendants and what the government has done to them, and more importantly, see what they've done to these families, it really keeps me motivated. And luckily, I turned 55 yesterday, and luckily I've been blessed my whole life with a high energy level. So I'm glad to put it to good use. I know when my husband on a Saturday afternoon gives me the look that I better get off my computer and go do something else. So, but he understands the importance of what I'm doing. My family's been super supportive and my friends. So that helps. But thank you for mentioning that. And, there's a lot more work to be done, and I don't want to say honored, but I do feel privileged to have the access that I do, the ability to spend all this time on it, the resources that I need to travel to D.C. or get these court documents, because just a lot of people don't. So, that's just my contribution to exposing what's happening and defending the voiceless and people who have no one speaking for them.
Julie, it's Buck. I also think you're great. I am very, but I want to ask you about what just happened, if I can, which is this just really jaw-dropping 22-year sentence for Enrique Tarrio. I read the indictment, actually read through it a couple of times, or at least parts of it a few times over again, just to see what is. I know the top count is seditious conspiracy. The first hour we talked about some of the other seditious conspiracy cases that where there was a guilty verdict, and it involved jihadists who wanted to commit mass murder and were taking active steps to blow up, a building, a bridge, the World Trade Center, things like that. What is the worst thing that Enrico Tarrio actually did? What's the thing that he did that's the worst thing that he did?
Well, the worst thing, I think, was that he was the head of of a few of these group chats with other Proud Boys and FBI informants, by the way, talking about the stolen election, talking about their support for Donald Trump, talking about making plans to go to D.C. on January 6th. That's basically what got Enrique Tarrio and the others in the crosshairs of the Department of Justice. And, of course, this crazy seditious conspiracy, which, as you know, if you've read the language of the statute and the jury instructions, there's basically no burden of proof for the government to demonstrate to a jury, which is why they're coming back quickly with convictions. 4 out of 5 of these guys convicted by this jury back in April on seditious conspiracy. So, look, this is all to bolster the bogus narrative set by Christopher Wray and others that domestic terrorists, right-wing militias pose this grave threat to the country. And also, of course, to punish Trump supporters and people who protested Joe Biden's election.
I have to ask you, Julie, because as I'm reading this, I think I saw some of the things that the indictment, right? So the indictment is just their version of the events. It's not like I'm looking at what the defense came up with as a justification or rationalization. I'm looking at the actual indictment, and it seems like when he says, meaning Terrio or some of the others, yeah, we're going to take back our government, this is 1776 all over again, that like they're saying, well, you tried to take back the government, therefore you're going to prison for 20 years.
That's right. It's stunning. I'm telling you guys, not only in this case, but others. The invocation of the founding fathers or talking about 1776 or revolution has been used as evidence against these defendants, as if talking about 1776 or the spirit of it or rising up against your government, which is, of course, our right, redress of grievances, protest, our government officials. These are all supposed to be constitutionally protected rights that have now been turned into crimes. And not only regular crimes like felonies, but now crimes of terror. You have Judge Amit Mehta, who has declared that obstruction of an official proceeding, a post-Enron statute that has to do with tampering with evidence and witness, that is now a federal crime of terrorism. Obstruction of an official proceeding, seditious conspiracy, and then in the Proud Boys case, shaking a metal fence, a temporary metal fence, now has risen to the level of destroying government property, which is one defense attorney said, no, we're talking about blowing up government buildings. We're talking about attacking military installations. We're not talking about a few rabble-rousers shaking a fence. That is not a crime of terrorism. But guess what, guys? Now it is. Thanks to Judge Tim Kelly, Amit Mehta, who have turned these otherwise dubious offenses that have nothing to do with political protest into new crimes of terrorism. And the GOP has no clue what's going on, not a clue what's happening and where this is headed.
Okay, so that's where I was going to go next. Buck and I were talking about how, and this is not a new argument that we've made. We've made it with you on the air. We've made it with you off the air. How do you think Republicans have responded to a clear political attack against them using January 6th as the cudgel, so to speak? And what does this speak to going forward, not only for January 6th, but for Donald Trump and any other Republican, based on what you've seen, with what now clearly appears to me to be a court that effectively is an opportunity for Democrats to try to put Republicans in jail, while knowing that simultaneously there is virtually zero chance, no matter what Democrats do, that a D.C. jury will ever hold them accountable.
Right. So to your point, they can get away with this because they know the script will never be flipped on them. Even if you tried to, under Donald Trump presidency, use the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office to prosecute some of these same, people on these same new charges and same new terror enhancements, you're not going to have a D.C. judge and you're not going to have a D.C. jury get away with it. So that's the problem. But beyond this, setting up new terror crimes, et cetera, this is a warning shot for next year. This is criminalizing any protest against an election. This is criminalizing any investigation into voter fraud. This is criminalizing any way to raise money to investigate or file a lawsuit. This is about preventing any of this from happening next year, as Democrats are going to try to pull the same thing that they did in 2020. So that's really the most dangerous territory now. But they're arresting people every week. This is, as we've always talked about, this goes beyond Donald Trump. They've got more than 1,100 defendants. They're arresting people every single day. I'm getting alerts. A 22-year-old young man from Utah last week took his own life after he was charged with 4 misdemeanors. He was 19 on January 6th. He sees what is happening to these January 6th defendants, their lives being ruined. And rather than face a D.C. judge and possibly a D.C. jury and have his life destroyed, this man, George Meekum, one of 10 children, a rural Utah family, very tight-knit, very religious, ended his life last week, then endure this torment. He's one of 4 to 6 defendants who have committed suicide. This is the human wreckage, not just the long prison sentences, not just the charges. This is the human wreckage that this Department of Justice is creating while the GOP sits on its hands, basically complicit in what this Department of Justice is doing.
Check out Julie Kelly's Declassified on Substack, where she does a lot of her reporting and shares what she's covering and the research she's doing there. Julie, to your point about Republicans, I mean, one, these defendants, these J6 defendants, I mean, do they feel abandoned by their party? And actually, even more specifically, I'm wondering, who paid the legal bills? Were there legal bills paid for these 6 that were charged in seditious conspiracy? Was any of the money coming from some of the funding that the Trump that the Trump orbit has raised? What can you tell us about funding for the legal defense?
Not to my knowledge, and I believe that at least half of these defense attorneys have been court appointed, so they are paid for by the government.
I mean, do these defendants feel abandoned by their side, at least in terms of getting a fair, getting a robust defense and a fair trial?
They feel abandoned, and they have been abandoned. When I was in that courtroom last week, it was basically empty except for a few family members, members of the Department of Justice and some reporters. Can you imagine how filled a courtroom would be with Democratic lawmakers and political leaders had their own supporters been subjected to what these Proud Boys or anyone has been? I don't think a single Republican lawmaker, and I mean, you can walk to the courthouse from the Capitol building. It's literally 2 blocks. I mean, the courthouse is in the shadow of the Capitol building. You can walk there. I don't think a single Republican lawmaker has attended a single court hearing, day of trial, sentencing for any of these individuals. Now, I know a few have gone to the jail, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Louis Gohmert. That's commendable. Can you imagine if that courtroom would have been filled with people like Kevin McCarthy, James Jordan? Anyone would have been there to listen to what Judge Tim Kelly was doing to these men in this government that they pay for. They have oversight for these bodies. They help fund the D.C. District Court Federal Court House. They fund the Washington FBI field office. They fund the D.C. U.S. Attorney's Office. But they act like they don't. They act like they have no responsibility. And now they have culpability in what these federally funded agencies that they have congressional oversight for, they now are part of a bigger problem here. So I find that particularly shameful.
Julie, last question. Obviously, the lingering impact and the shadow of the Trump prosecution, which is set, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, for March 4th right now. Have you heard anything else about that, or any of your sources inside D.C. talked about whether or not they believe that trial will be able to actually start on March 4th?
That's what it's set for now. My sources in D.C., which have better sources than I do, with more powerful people, do not believe that Jack Smith will bring additional charges against Donald Trump for January 6th. I still don't believe it. I don't think Jack Smith is going to be settled with a 4-count indictment, including one key obstruction of an official proceeding that is now sitting, possibly could be taken by the Supreme Court. They could make that decision next month. So he's got a pretty sketchy indictment and a major charge that could be really a legal limbo by that point.
Julie Kelly, everybody, check out her Substack, Declassified with Julie Kelly. Julie, thank you for being with us.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.